Yeah, no, a lot is happening. Let's start with Bayern Munich. Some frantic activity is happening there. They're playing Holstein Kiel, a team that they have some history against, right? Knocked them out of the DFB Pokal a few years ago. And that's probably what we would be talking about if Bayern Munich weren't on the verge of selling Mathys Tel. I feel like this is a never-ending saga that's probably finally, hopefully, coming to an end. This is the if you are a subscriber to the Substack on the podcast and you're in the Substack chat, you know that this is the most talked about topic by far, and it's not even close. Mathys Tel is the hottest topic in that chat, and I think it's finally coming to a conclusion. You could kind of tell after the Champions League match where he went to the stands and, kind of said goodbye to the fans. And today reports emerging that Tottenham are leading the race to sign him in a deal worth 60 million euros. This would be a club record sale for Bayern Munich, the highest transfer fee that they've ever received for a player. He's only 19. They signed him for a sizable fee back when he was 17 from Stade Rennes. I think it was about 20 million euros with add-ons. But still, I didn't think they would get this kind of money for him this late in the transfer window. And, I actually think that this opens up quite a bit of possibilities. It's an expensive month for Bayern Munich too. You have to remember, Stefan, they're signing Alphonso Davies in a deal worth 120 million euros in its entirety, right? Jamal Musiala, that deal is coming close as well. And that's going to be even more. We're talking probably for an entire package between 175 and 200 million euros for Jamal Musiala, all included. And Joshua Kimmich, that is another contract that they have to sign. So they really do need the money, is what I'm saying. But I don't think they expected to get this sort of money for Mathys Tel at this point of the transfer window. I think that is probably the most surprising development here.
Yeah, it's really interesting how it has played out. Max Eberl was speaking after the game, the Champions League game in midweek, and he said, I've got a quote in front of me. He said, "Our opinion of Matthias hasn't changed. He's an incredible, great potential, but in the end, you have to look at what's best for everyone involved. Yes, Tel wants to go loan or permanent. We will assess all the options. I've rarely had so many clubs call me about a player before." So I suspect Bayern probably sat down with him and said, "Look, we understand your frustrations. If we get an offer which matches our opinion of you, then we'll let you go." Probably not expecting anyone to really offer serious money for a player who's struggled for minutes at Bayern over the last two years. And then sure enough, they must have forgot that the Premier League exists, where large doshes of cash get thrown around without any real consequence or thought. And sure enough, Tottenham, who have been desperately lacking any sort of central defenders all season, have decided to take their entire January transfer window budget and spend it on a striker who has never actually nailed down a starting position for a senior men's football team in his entire career. I was actually as you were talking there and you talked about him coming from France, I do remember when Bayern signed him from Stade Rennes, and I remember saying 20 million euros a lot of money for a player who's only played like a handful of games for Stade Rennes at the time. And sure enough, you could say, well, it paid off because, they're going to get their money back and then some if he moves to Tottenham. And I suspect this maybe isn't done. I think I've read that Tottenham have their offer's been accepted, but if that's the case, we might see some other clubs make an offer, because Arsenal as well are desperately looking for a striker, and they made a bid for Ollie Watkins, which is slightly higher than that. So we might find that they join the race last minute as well. But it's interesting that, yes, Bayern will make a sizable profit on him, but it's almost the exact same situation where Tottenham or Arsenal or Man United's been linked as well. They're all now looking to sign a player who also hasn't played a huge amount of football either. I was actually speaking to someone, a journalist in England, about him yesterday, and we're talking back and forth about it, and he made a really good point where he said Mathys Tel is basically like a theoretical player at this point. Like, he's not actually proven at any point. And this was the kind of debate that our subscribers have had over and over and over again, which we've also got involved in, where a lot of Bayern fans have been clamouring for him to get more game time, but he doesn't. Whenever he does play, he hasn't always impressed, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. He looks like a player who's still learning his trade. He's almost like a paradox, if you will, in the sense that every time he doesn't play, he gets better and better. And that's just the nature of football, that it's the grass is always green on the other side thing, and I think Bayern fans have been clamouring for him just because he isn't Serge Gnabry or isn't Kingsley Coman. And when he has played, he hasn't done tremendously well, to be honest with you. So it's a huge transfer fee, and I completely understand why Bayern would say, yeah, okay, fine. If you guys really want him that bad, then you can have him, because maybe there was a pathway for him. You can theorize and say, yeah, of course, Bayern would presumably sell or let Leroy Sané leave at the end of the year. They'd probably move on Serge Gnabry or Kingsley Coman, maybe both. And in that case, there'd be a lot more space in that kind of front three, where Tel can obviously step in. But then even then, I don't think he'd be a starter next season. I still think he'd be a backup. He'd probably get more game time. He can maybe play second fiddle to Harry Kane more often or play off the left. But I don't think he's ready to be a starter for Bayern. So I guess when you think about it that way, and you think that Bayern probably couldn't offer him or promise him a starting role in the next 12 months, maybe that's where the kind of line was drawn, and he said, well, thanks, but no thanks, but I'll try my chances elsewhere. And I guess a club like Tottenham, who are desperate to sign someone this month, are more than happy to oblige him.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I remember writing the Substack article on Mathys Tel when he joined Bayern Munich at first. I was on the verge of joining, right? And remember talking to quite a lot of people about him, and we have a very well-informed colleague working for Transfermarkt, Ronan Karov, who knows a lot about French football. And I remember talking a lot to him about it. And there's a lot of tidbits that I learned at the time about Mathys Tel. Like, for example, he started as a defender, right? He was moved forward later on in his career. There was always kind of the question what he really is. Some people compared him to Thierry Henry. Some people compared him a little bit to Robert Lewandowski. I think this is something that is still true today. We don't know quite what his best position is even today, right? Watching him against Slovan Bratislava midweek in a game where Bayern Munich needed a lot of goals, they really struggled scoring goals, and he was part of that problem. He didn't kind of played off a number 9, and that didn't really seem to suit him, even though he does drift wide quite a bit. I remember in a key match against RB Leipzig in the DFL Super Cup, he really struggled with his chances as well, right? And this is a game that Bayern Munich lost at the time. And he's really, it feels like he's a year and a half on, he still hasn't really recovered from that moment that when he was given a big opportunity, he wasn't really able to shine. And you're getting to the point now where you wonder, maybe this is just a player that doesn't fit there. And you get to the point now too where you wonder what he is as a player. You have to remember too, when Bayern Munich signed Mathys Tel, they were actually in for another French striker, Hugo Ekitike, at the time, right? Who then ended up going to PSG and is now at Eintracht Frankfurt, and is exactly that central forwards number 1 striker that Bayern Munich were probably looking for when they signed Mathys Tel, and didn't end up getting. But and I think this is very where the whole paradox starts. They scouted a player, and highly talented player, but even at the time, a lot of people struggled to define him. And as you said too, he didn't play much at Stadtrenn, and it is kind of like, he reminds me a little bit back in the day when they signed Renato Sanchez from Benfica for an enormous fee, and then he came off the back of a very strong Euros and a good season at Benfica, but they just signed him because they could, without actually having a position for him in the squad. And Sanchez too, after several moves on, still didn't quite work out to be the player that everyone thought he would be. And it's kind of the similar thing here. Maybe it's going to be better at Tottenham or Aston Villa or Man United or wherever he's going to end up. And I think there's a lot of doors opening now because, Saudi clubs have woken up and paid a lot of money for some players like Sean Doran, right? So that kind of opens, that's the first domino to fall, so to say, and there's money all of a sudden available. But, I think this is the one caution that I would have to say, that if you sign Mathys Tel, be sure that you actually know what you're getting or what you're using him for, because he's a player with high potential, with a position that isn't really defined.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good way of putting it. I was actually thinking before we started recording, excuse me, whether Bayern may regret this in much the way they. I don't know if they do regret the Ryan Gravenberg deal, but he's obviously gone on to bigger and better things. And you can understand if Bayern Munich fans would think, oh gosh, it'd be great if we had found a way to fit him into our team and watch him develop as a Bayern player. And, if Tel obviously goes off and does well in the Premier League, then similar sort of thing would be a concern. But you're right. And at the end of the day, it's got nothing really to do with whether Bayern got this one wrong, whether they mistreated him, whether they didn't have the right kind of pathway in place. I had this debate with one of our subscribers, Nate, who's a very passionate Bayern fan, and he makes some great points, and he was saying, it'd be great if he just played a bit more instead of Serge Gnabry or Kingsley Coman. And I said, well, look, it's not as if Bayern have Ole Hoeneß in the sidelines and or Rummenigge or something like that who can do what they want. They have a very young, very inexperienced head coach of Vincent Kompany who, at the wrong turn, will have the knives out against him immediately. He has to prove to the entire world that he's good enough to be Bayern's head coach. And it's understandable that he's doing that with proven senior players in his team right now.
Yeah.
Serge Gnabry and Kingsley Coman excite people? No, of course they don't. They've been there for 100 years. In many regards, both of them probably quite underrated, especially Kingsley Coman, in my opinion. But, Vincent Kompany knows what he can get out of them. He knows what they'll do. He knows that he can rely on them. And the proof's in the pudding in the sense that they've got a points tally in the Bundesliga right now, which is better than anyone since Pep Guardiola at Bayern Munich. So that's unfortunately just the situation that Mathys Tel finds himself in. He's a victim of that circumstance, but it doesn't mean that it's anyone's fault. And, if he goes on to better things in the Premier League or wherever else, then all power to him. But while I appreciate that Bayern fans are frustrated that there's not enough young players coming through at Bayern, or at least aware enough until a few years ago when obviously Musiala and Pavlovic were coming through, I don't think we can use Mathys Tel as an example of, Bayern blocking the pathways, because there just simply wasn't the circumstance for him to kind of step into his team as their, first choice left winger or striker. And obviously, he's a very ambitious young man. He's not willing to wait around. A lot of players his age would. You can maybe look at someone like Stanisic, for example, who's waited around for his time and is finally coming to him. Kimmich as well, maybe to a large extent. I don't know how old Kimmich was when he started. He just became a starter for Bayern, but I don't think it was this young. So, some young players are happy to wait. Some young players want to move on and be playing football immediately. So it's just maybe the best case scenario for all parties if he does move on to Tottenham or Arsenal or wherever else, whoever wants him, and Bayern just get on with it, get on with things.
Yeah, take the money and cut ties. I think it was also a couple of things really telling as you were talking there. There's a couple of reports after the Slovan Bratislava game heavily criticizing Vinny Kompany for his squad selection, right? That he didn't go all out. He shouldn't have played the reserve. He shouldn't have played the bench players. He shouldn't have given time to them because they needed lots of goals. That's exactly what the point that you're making. Like, even in a game that he won, he was heavily criticized for his lineup, right? And this is the position that he finds himself in. And I also think it's quite telling that the week that Bayern Munich make this decision with the Mike, the really highly rated 16-year-old center forward who was developed by the club, he makes the squad, and he's more of a number 9, right? Has a defined position, scores lots of games in goals in the youth for the youth teams. That he makes an appearance with the first team, and I think that's also kind of telling maybe that the club has said, well, look, Mathys, there's another kid here who we've developed, and he's ready to step up, and he's probably more ready and willing to sit on the bench and get minutes here and there than you are. So I think it's just all kind of telling how it's going, what has happened over the last little bit. And of course, it's all coming in the backdrop of this Holstein Kiel game, which we suspect Bayern Munich will win significantly. So yeah, very interesting what's going to happen with Mathys Tel.